Hi, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mrs. Martin, and I'm here to explain to you a little bit about your independent reading project. So on Friday, March 6th, you were given the directions that are posted here on the right for our active reading strategy for the month, which was visualizing. So visualizing is really just a fancy way of saying, are you taking the time to create pictures in your head while you read? For a lot of people, reading is just running their eyes over the page, or if you're listening to an Audible book, you might be listening to it while you are helping do the dishes or driving in a car or, doing other homework. And really, while those things can be enjoyable, it doesn't really give you the opportunity to visualize. Why do we want you to visualize? Well, it's really simple. People who visualize are those that create mental images in their head while they read. And because of that, they remember what they've read a lot longer. They also understand what they read at a much deeper level. So it makes reading a more meaningful experience for the reader. What you're expected to do when you visualize is to really try to imagine what the characters look like, what the settings look like, and what the situations look like as they unfold. If you're finding you're having a really tough time doing this, then it might be that you don't understand what it is that you are reading. And that might be a really good cue to go back and reread. When you visualize, we suggested that you maybe consider what the cast of your story would look like. So if you think about your favorite movie stars, YouTube stars, TV stars, and think about them in a story that you're reading, that kind of helps you to picture what's going on. Also, at the end of each chapter, run a movie in your mind. Ask yourself, what stands out from what I just read? What are the important parts of that chapter that I would want to see captured in a movie? And then, of course, our last bullet point asks for you to remember that if you take the time to even just draw a quick sketch, doesn't matter the quality of the sketch, but you're actually consciously putting the information about what you're reading in a different part of your brain. And since we did do that brain research packet, you guys are aware that if you put information in more than one part of your brain, you're able to access it more quickly. So, our directions for our visualization task. Initially, we wanted to have you guys do this with us in class. We had hoped to have, markers and crayons and poster boards and all sorts of stuff to make this a little more of an artistic expression. But since we're working with you from home, please know we're very open to what formats you choose to use. So the example I'm going to be showing you was created in a Google Doc and exported as a PDF file. But you can do it in Google Slides, you can do it in Keynote, PowerPoint, Pages, Word, anything that you're comfortable with. So a one-pager simply is your single-page response to what it is that you've read. It's supposed to be a meeting of both visual and verbal information that represents the story that you've gone through. So for our one-pager, there's a specific bulleted list. It's kind of like a checklist of the items that we'd like for you to complete. So it tells us that, of course, you would have to include your title and author of your book. Keep in mind, titles of full-length novels do get underlined, so you want to make sure that's the case. We need a border around the edges that reflects the theme of the book that you've read. And if you're having a hard time figuring out theme, in Google Classroom, you can look for the theme video and the theme PowerPoint, which were both posted in order to help you figure that out. A center illustration that can represent the novel in some way. So if, for example, we were talking about the book The Outsiders, your illustration might be of the burning church. It might be of the knife that Johnny uses to kill Bob. It might be of a sunset, since that's what connects Ponyboy and Cherry and helps Ponyboy change the way he views socias and society in general. But it can be any kind of scene, character, or symbol that's important to the story. You should take a moment to explain a little bit about that in a caption. That being said, since this is a digital project now, you can and should consider taking pictures from the internet. That's absolutely allowable. A description of the protagonist. So we want you to take your main character who the story focuses on and who encounters that conflict. We want that person to be described with 3 adjectives and an explanation of at least 3 sentences. So since most of our protagonists are showing growth and change throughout our stories, it might be good to mention what they're like in the beginning and how they've changed by the end. The race strategy needs to be used in a paragraph to explain the conflict of the story. Now, when we talk about conflict, we're not talking about just a small problem that pops up. We're talking about that main driving problem that gets presented to us in the beginning of the story and doesn't really settle out until the end of the story. So in that description, you also need to include the type of conflict, so internal or external, keeping in mind that internal conflicts are those character versus self kind of conflicts, where the person's trying to change their habits, their ways, their outlook on life, their perspective. External conflicts are those conflicts where someone is against someone else or they're against another group. So you have a problem outside of that person's individual self. And also the category needs to be included. So is it character versus character versus self, character versus technology, character versus society? Keep those things in mind. And if you can't remember those things, then keep in mind in Google Classroom, you can scroll back because our presentation on conflict is still living right there in your Google Classroom feed. And a definition with 2 examples quoted from the book of a literary device you noticed while you were reading. So we're not asking you to pick out every literary device. We want you to pick out one literary device and find 2 examples of it. So keep in mind, you may use drawings, images that were, hand-drawn by you. Those are fine. If you're going to do that, I would recommend that you photograph it on your cell phone and then you upload it to your Google Drive. And that's pretty easy to do if you download the Google Drive app to your cell phone. And then that way it's in your Drive and you can easily add it to a Google document, or if you're using Apple applications, you could move it from your photos into something like Keynote or Pages. Obviously, we don't mind whatever medium you want to use. If you are a digital drawer and that works for you, by all means, feel free. If you want to color something and then take a picture of it, that's fine. But we do ask that your writing be neat. So we're asking that you make sure if you're going to handwrite something and photograph it, that it's done in ink, because when you photograph pencil, it's very difficult to read. Additionally, if you are going to type, make sure you use a font and a font color that are readable so that it can be seen for its ideas. The content should cover the entire page. We don't want, like an essay. We don't want something that looks like, it's paragraph after paragraph. We do want something that's visually appealing and that'll grab somebody's attention. So in order to give you an idea of what that looks like, we do have an example over on the left. And if you look at the last page of your packet, it does have a rubric that tells you exactly how many points you're going to earn for each of the things you complete. So for 15 points, we're starting with the idea of theme. And in our example, in the lower left corner, they've given us a border that looks like hands that are holding hands, okay? And then they've explained that border. It says, the theme of the story is how important brotherhood can be. This is symbolized by the holding of hands. Brotherhood isn't just between 2 males who are related. Brotherhood in this novel is between Brian and Mark, who are best friends from childhood. When their relationship ended, it was incredibly painful because the 2 boys were more than friends. They were bonded as brothers and couldn't imagine their lives without each other in it. This loss of friendship proves that brotherhood is something significant that people come to depend on. So it seems like in this book, which is That Was Then, This Is Now by S.E. Hinton, the idea of brotherhood is the big idea. It's the theme that keeps coming back into the story. Okay, so 15 points for writing a paragraph about that. And our example isn't perfect. I would love to see this paragraph indented. But other than that, they've done a nice job of explaining why they chose the border they chose and how it reflects the theme. In the center of the page, we're asking for you to include an illustration. So like I said, those of you who are excellent artists, this is your chance to shine. Those of you who aren't, don't feel bad about that. Feel free to grab clip art. We have some clip art over here. And just, use it and make it your own. Make sure that it ties to your story and can be explained. So for this particular illustration, we have two different things going on. In the center, we have the characters from the story, and then the person who made this underneath tells us who those characters are. Mike Chambers, Angela Shepard, Tim Shepard, Curly Shepard, Brian Douglas, Mark Jennings, Eminem Carlson, Kathy Carlson, and Charlie. And then they give us this visual image of actual M&Ms. And so we know that this little character right here, this guy, his name is Eminem. So that must tie into it, but our artist here does share with us what these M&Ms symbolize. And if you notice, this is the exact same picture of the M&Ms, except it's done in negative. So it kind of shows us something must have changed in the story for us to get these bright and colorful ones, and then we have these dark and dreary ones over here. So it says, M&Ms symbolize not just Kathy's brother, but his innocence and youthfulness, which dies in this story because of Mark. This causes Mark and Brian to split. So without giving away too much about the story, we see that this little guy looks up to this blonde guy right here, right? That's supposed to be the Mark character. And so Eminem isn't just literally looking up at Mark. Maybe figuratively he was looking up to Mark. He wanted to be like Mark, and somehow that landed him in trouble. So whatever happens, those pictures kind of represent that change in the story. So that's kind of neat. It tells us at the top center section, have the title and the author of the story. So the title is represented right here. It's a little more colorful, which is nice. I appreciate that. Keep in mind that when you do put a title onto this, if you are going to type it, it should be underlined and it should be capitalized. We have the author's name. Obviously, that should be capitalized. It also tells us in our rubric that on the bottom right, we need to create that description of the protagonist. So that main character who encounters the problem. So it says down here, character description. Brian Douglas is the protagonist in the novel. At the beginning of the story, we learn that Brian is likable, confident, and handsome. So we have our 3 adjectives highlighted for us there to clearly show that they've been used. However, a big part of his confidence is built on his relationship with his best friend, Mark. As Brian starts to date Kathy, he and Mark grow apart. Eventually, Brian is forced to turn on Mark, and this ends their friendship. At the end of the story, Brian is lonely, withdrawn, and depressed. So we've got 3 more adjectives highlighted for us there. He breaks up with his girlfriend, stops socializing with friends, and only goes to work or school. He doesn't know who to trust since he trusted Mark for so long, and it only caused him pain. So this does a nice job of describing a character who maybe started off a little more lighthearted and likable, and then at the end is kind of antisocial, it seems, right? So interesting description, kind of makes me want to read the story. Okay. Our next item on our rubric checklist in the top right is to write about the main conflict in our story. So let's take a look at how they did that. Now keep in mind, this is supposed to use the race strategy. So at some point, this person has to have a direct quote from the story as well as a page number. It says, there are many conflicts in young adult literature. In the novel That Was Then, This Is Now by S.E. Hinton, the main conflict is that Mark Jennings and Brian Douglas are growing apart. This is a character versus character external conflict. So they told us the type, they told us the category right there up front. The 2 boys were best friends who lived together after Mark's parents died, and they literally did everything together, just like brothers. Brian starts to grow and change when he starts dating Kathy, and Mark gets jealous. At the end of the novel, Brian turns Mark into the police, but feels guilty about it. On page 186, Brian goes to visit Mark and tries to repair their relationship. Mark says to him, quote, the difference is, that was then, this is now. This was Mark's way of letting Brian know that they can never go back to the brotherhood they once had. So in this, we see they've done a lot of of description up front. It seems like the R step and the A step are really, really long for them, and that's fine. You can use as many sentences as you would like. Race just guarantees that you have 4 sentences minimum. You can certainly have more. The C step is here represented clearly. We've got a page number, we've got a quote, and this quote actually goes right back to the title, kind of helps us understand why the book is called what it is. And the E step does a fairly good job of explaining what that quote's significance is in terms of the conflict. So that's pretty well done. And then the top left, which is our literary device. So our literary device section, which is worth 15 points, this person chose to talk about similes. In the fictional novel That Was Then, This Is Now, the author S.E. Hinton uses many literary devices. One that she uses often is simile. A simile is a comparison that uses the words like or as. So they've given us that definition right there so that we know exactly what it is, and it's bolded so it stands out. Nicely done. In chapter 1 of the novel, Brian describes his best friend Mark as being like a golden lion. So even though this person does say chapter 1, it probably would have been better for them to give us an actual page number. On page 75, Brian again says he smiled like an innocent lion. So that, we definitely got the page number that time, right? This use of simile shows that Mark is golden, powerful, and confident. It also forebodes that Mark is dangerous, even to those who love him. So that's interesting. We've got our 2 examples quoted. Like I said, I'd probably take off a couple of points because we don't have a page number for that first one, but it's fairly solidly done. Okay. And then, of course, 25 points for grammar, which is your word choices, your sentence structures. Are you capitalizing? Are you spelling things correctly? If you're allowed to pick any format you want for this one-pager, pick one that has a spelling and grammar check built in so that way you don't have to worry so much about the way you've presented this, because then that will help you review it and revise it when you're done. But overall, this is a 100-point project. You are being given the entire week to work on this. It's the only work that we are assigning this week. So with that in mind, do a nice job of it. Go back to your book, use it, help be inspired by it. Try not to fall into the trap of, oh, there was a movie made of this book. I'll just take the movie pictures and use those. That's a trap because, like we saw with The Outsiders, the characters in the book don't exactly fit the description of the characters in the movie. So I don't want you to feel like, oh, well, if there's a movie version of this, I'm kind of stuck with what they did in the movie. You really aren't. You can be as creative with this as you would like. This is a very simple example. You can make it as elaborate and as interesting as you choose to. But the idea is to make sure you represent all of the information that's in this rubric. Of course, if you have questions, please send an email to your English teacher. We are always happy to help you. And if you need to come back and look at this again, it'll be here for you waiting. So we're really excited and look forward to seeing what you guys can create. Enjoy.